Hey everyone, what's going on? Casual TF2. So just over 2 years ago, I made a video in which I talked about topics that were selected by my subscribers. And so now today, we're coming full circle. We're going back to the island, Kate, to do it again. And as promised, I'll be discussing every topic that you guys commented about on the announcement video that was briefly public. Thank you to everyone for their comments, but especially the ones that seem to be more thought out, so to speak. First up, Muscat suggested I talk about the Viking Age. As a general overview, if you are unfamiliar, the Viking Age essentially describes the centuries at the end of the first millennium, AD, and it's pertaining to Scandinavian people exploring around Europe a lot and essentially raping and pillaging other cultures for their resources or just outright trying to take their land. The stereotypical image we have of a Viking naturally arose from this part of history. So the first thing that strikes me as interesting about this period is that it sort of embodies the extreme end of the concept of conquest and imperialization. And maybe not actually imperialization, but more so the innate human desire that makes imperialization possible. The human desire to explore the globe, to understand everything that can be understood. It's the desire that pushes people to always want more and to look to new places, even when their circumstances in their current location might be totally feasible to survive. There are different theories and probable explanations as to why so many of the Northern Europeans were going on these sea expeditions at this time, but there is a core element to it that is probably no different from all of the other conquests and invasions throughout history. In one way, I think of this desire to set out from your home country and conquer the world as one of the earliest solutions to the meaning of life problem that seems to differentiate human beings from the rest of the life on our planet. You have to kind of imagine what life was like before the Industrial Revolution to understand why the response to, what do I do now, is to go invade another country. While one of the most apparent differences may be how much harder life seemed pre-Industrial Revolution, how much more likely you were to die from disease or be killed or suffer greatly by the unpredictable fate of nature and weather, I think the big difference that might explain why you don't have this Viking mentality much anymore is that life was really mundane and just boring as shit sometimes back then. You had to put so much effort into just making sure that your house didn't collapse, metaphorically and literally. It was so much easier for things to just go wrong and descend into chaos. Just consider how little a storm affects us in first world countries today. Most people died back then from poor nutrition, from childbirth, or just the straight up intensity of farming. There's a considerable case that has been made that the agricultural revolution and our departure from hunter-gatherer lifestyles actually made life way harder for us, and it didn't stop being like that until very recently. Trade and wealth in general emerged as concepts that are really an extension of the necessity for health and land. Why trade? So you can get food, so you can stay alive. Why be wealthy? So you can protect your land or have more of it. And land is really an extension of health anyway, because all land offers is physical security and space to farm. This obsession with land and wealth is really interesting because it's the biological game of survival mutating into a higher degree of complexity. It's no longer just about having as many offspring as possible. People want to have the most amount of resources possible to ensure the betterment of their offspring. And even if just by a few fractions of a percent, make it less likely that they will die. We made the game of passing on our genes a lot more complicated than the rest of the animal kingdom. And we certainly made the game global. Immigration between different regions was already somewhat common in Europe following the fall of the Roman Empire, but what Vikings became notorious for was a strong-willed determination to enter into the unknown and return better off than they went in, sometimes even stupidly. Like, you have to consider that while I am arguing that going out to steal land and wealth is a natural progression of survival, it was still very risky. After all, there were plenty of people in the world at this time who much preferred trying to keep to their own premises and keep things from falling apart there. And life at sea, particularly in this time period, was brutal as fuck, especially considering a lot of times they had no idea where they were going. kind of bring this back to what I mentioned earlier, humanity, and men particularly, cling to external purpose. Well, historically, the woman's purpose is very clear. To literally harbor the vulnerable growing offspring for 9 months, and then care to an equally vulnerable child for a number of demanding years, which was a considerable portion of our previously short lifespan, especially considering they might have multiple children and are always taking the risk of dying while giving birth. Men's purpose of provide and protect is more inherently vague and leads to a more flexible interpretation. What may have started as, look at all this fruit I found, and here's some sheepskin for warmth. That's helpful, right? Evolved to, I conquered England and I'm the king now. That's helpful, right? It is indeed still helpful, but where does this progression end? Is there a point of unreasonable progression? When are we safe or wealthy or powerful enough? In our modern world, it's easier for us to see how obsession with safety can lead to excessive coddling, or how, after a certain amount of wealth, your odds of survival generally stop increasing. However, the silver lining to all of this is that good things do come from our reinvented life purposes, no matter how extreme they might seem. For humanity, all of our technology and progression as a species comes from this never-ending, never-satisfying urge to find new ways to make life slightly easier or slightly better. And in the case of the Vikings, they found Iceland. And like I alluded to earlier, some Danish guy briefly invaded England and was the king for a little while, but I think Iceland is a more exciting and ultimately impactful phenomenon. My fascination with modern Iceland is entirely to do with the fact that they seem to be some sort of superior breed of humans. To start with, the crime rates of Iceland are some of the lowest in the world. Like, violent crime just essentially doesn't happen in Iceland. It's ridiculous. They also totally lucked out on having really good natural resources, which allowed them to be incredibly self-sufficient. And I'm sure you've all heard of the really stunning nature. But I swear, if you find anything that involves some sort of skill, you will find an overrepresentation of Icelandic people doing it and being really good at it. In the 2008 and 2012 Olympics, Iceland sent about 30 athletes. If we compare this to a country like France, France sent around 330 people. So you'd guess maybe that Iceland has about a tenth of the population of France. Wrong. Iceland has 1/200th the population of France. There's only like 300,000 people in Iceland. And I don't know, in every category I've thought of, you find Icelandic people. And I know this isn't really a very rigorous observation here, but try it out for yourself. Maybe you're into like pro table tennis or weightlifting or like indie films or something. Just look for yourself. See if there are Icelandic people involved. If they are at all, it's almost always an overrepresentation of their population, because most countries with that kind of population are basically nobodies. We all might experience something like a Viking age in our own lives, where our purpose segues in an extreme direction. You might commit a crime, or die, or unleash some sort of unforeseen consequences on yourself from taking something too far. But you might also discover and create Iceland. JSX5 wanted to know my thoughts on the state of the casual format in TF2 right now. Well, regarding the actual nuances of the gameplay, like random crits and spread or class limits, I still think the stock TF2 you get when you install the game and get in, a Valve Badwater server is pretty great. And the more I look back on what TF2 was like when I first started playing in 2012, and and compare it to all the subsequent eras leading to now, I tend to realize that the game always has some nitpicky issues with weapon balance that you can point out. But for the most part, it's pretty good, without anything too game-breaking. In 2012, I thought the flare gun, extinguisher, and dead ringer were way too good. And that items like the Crusader's crossbow and big gunner were beyond bad. They were just, you would never use them. And now, a lot of those things have flipped around. Now I complain about the Crusader's crossbow being too good, and how there's pretty much no reason to ever use the Ambassador. These details always seem to change year from year, but the core mechanics that you yearn for, and the great maps that make you want to play casual are still there. I just hope, like anyone else, that Valve doesn't accidentally screw anything up too bad. I could go on and on about weapon balance and how I don't think most of the weapons that have crit power-ups should be in the game, or any weapon that counters the class's weaknesses should be in the game. But that's probably fruitless, as changes like removing weapons or hats will never really come, as much as I might desire that they will. It's particularly interesting that the topic of random crits and random weapon spread has been brought up more recently, mainly due to Uncle Dane's Remove Random Crits video, and props to him for using his power in that way. Although, because of the video, we're seeing more contrarian keep random crits arguments than ever. I think it's a good thing to try to change. Though Valve might never remove them, seeing as they don't really like admitting mistakes by removing entire properties, they prefer tweaking properties. And it becomes problematic when a lot of the items have value that is tied to game mechanics. You know, Valve can't delete the Phlogistinator from the game because of all of the technically real monetary value people have put into a variety of Phlogistinator items. Furthermore, with random crits, it does break a lot of existing items that use the balance of no random crits, as well as the strange part critical kills, to some extent. However, there is some hypocrisy here, because while we don't see Valve back out of a gameplay concept entirely, we have seen them do it in the rare circumstance of the arena game type being entirely retired out of the game when the casual system was reworked in the Meet Your Match update. Try to avoid getting too nihilistic about change in TF2 and my expectations from Valve, but in terms of putting forth an argument, I don't believe you can make a reasonable justification for keeping random crits or random spread in the game. The reality is that 90% of the player base, who has more than a few hundred hours in the game, despises random crits. Before the Uncle Dane video, I've never heard anyone speak in favor of it. And most of the casual player base would have never known that random spread existed if someone hadn't told them it did. The irony of this whole situation is that random crits, and somehow random spread, are justified as adding RNG to give new players opportunities to make plays they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. But let alone the fact that random crits actually aid players doing higher damage anyway, most new players have no idea what the fuck is going on anyway. If they don't like the game, random crits won't make them stick around. For me, TF2 was the first real shooter I ever played, and as someone who spent the first few hundred hours literally just getting comfortable moving the mouse around and becoming familiar with basic mechanics like ammo and knowing where to go on the map, if random crits and random spread were not in the game, I literally wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. I already feel bad for talking about this as long as I have. Crits and spread bad, casual, mostly good. Chris asked me to speak about the rocket jumping community. And in truth, I probably have very little authority to speak about the rocket jumping community because I've never been majorly involved, and the time in which I was more interested in rocket jumping and interacting with the community was 5 years ago. So like most people, I'm familiar with a lot of the A-list names in the jump community, people who have been, really good for years. And I'm aware that there's a persistent effort to make jump media content, and there's a loyal audience to that as well. I haven't really been interested in jump movies for a while, but in my journey of falling in love with TF2, and just getting really excited about rocket jumping, watching jump movies was an absolutely essential ingredient to that. Delort's jump movies, Tears and Rain and Freedom, were just absolutely fucking great, and I'm sure totally responsible for getting like thousands of players inspired to put time and energy into jumping. There's so many dimensions to my appreciation for those jump videos. Of course, you have the music and the editing and just the artistic showcase of look at how we can make actions in a video game feel and perceptually seem really magical, which is totally inspiring to see what kind of videos you yourself could make with a video game as the centerpiece for intention, and just inspiring to want to play the game and see the beauty of the game again through a new perspective. And for a lot of people watching jump movies for the first time, it is a perspective they've never seen. Going from the very rudimentary excitement of just learning that you can rocket jump at all when you first play the game, and then getting to the point where you can actually execute it is so invigorating and enjoyable. And imagine going from that stage to then seeing the kind of crazy elaborate jumps that are in these jump videos. You know, you never see pogos or sinks or jumps even with more than one rocket in your youthful days of pubbing. So it really is a revelation to know how much is possible. I think the best part about those videos is that they aren't just speed runs of existing jump maps. And don't get me wrong, I understand the appeal of grinding out a map to account for the tiniest little details or racing a friend through a familiar course. But what's so great to me about these jump videos is that it really demonstrates how jumping is a creative thing. And it shows to the newer players that you can think of a map as like a playground, a domain of infinite possibilities in maneuvering oneself around. Freedom really is a pompously appropriate title, because you have so much freedom in the way you move around with mechanics like rocket jumping. As we play any game more and more, we become more accustomed to how nuanced basic Wasta movement can be, and we find expression of our playstyle just in that. But there's such an obvious, profound difference in how much potential there is in how you want to move around the map with rocket jumping. Even when in gameplay situations, always having the choice to rocket jump is such an interesting mechanic. When you watch high-level players, especially like a roaming soldier who is also some kind of jump veteran, it's so stimulating to see what kind of surprising decisions and literally the movements that they'll make when they're playing. I've kind of went off on a tangent here of the beauty of rocket jumping and the thrill of first uncovering how much potential is really there, and lesser so the jump community, but in conclusion, I only have good things to say about the jump community. The first jump server I became a regular on after seeing those movies and deciding I wanted to put some time into it to level up my skills had a really good atmosphere. There was always people on talking in the in-game voice chat, and it was almost always to instruct other people who needed help. I can't remember all the names, as this was in like 2012 and 13, but I specifically remember this guy, Val Drake, offering me a lot of help when I would get stuck at a certain point in a map. And I've realized since that kind of environment is rare. But even now, it still seems there's a strong community passionate about jumping and a growing amount of resources to help beginners. And that's something really unique about TF2, that it is. So many passionate microcosms, so many niche directions you can go in beyond what the stock game offers you on install. Smitty wanted me to talk about the size of my penis. So I did some measurements using the proper measuring procedures, and you're looking at 3.2 inches unactivated and 6.4 inches activated. And even with the flaccid measurement, I'm not assuming that too precisely, because as anyone with a penis would know, the rate of variability is pretty high. It's definitely pretty bizarre that unlike pretty much every other part of the body, the same penis can pretty much triple itself in size from its smallest form. It's just hard to imagine because most of our body stays pretty much the same. Granted, our stomach can expand a lot and probably shows similar variability, but I don't really take that as seriously because it's enclosed so well in our torso. I suppose the penis really is a rare insight into what it may be like to have the body of an octopus. To be able to dramatically move our body's focused mass around. I guess it really is a testament to the circulatory system as well. It's somewhat creepy to remember that all that size you're gaining is pure blood. Also, because I had to actually think about penis size for a little bit, I did some research, and you find pretty much the same results, or something very similar, over and over again. The British Journal of Urology International found that the average length, flaccid, is 3.61 inches, and while erect, 5.16 inches. Also interestingly, 90% of men have a 4 to 6 inch erect penis. It's kind of interesting because most guys probably don't really know how normal their penis size is because it is normal. Like, if your penis was obviously massive or tiny, you'd know it. But if 90% of people are within an inch above or below the average, you've probably been like me and never really thought about it and just kind of assumed it was relatively normal. Also, if you want to browse something kind of humorous, but probably also unexpectedly disheartening, you can check out the subreddit r/bigdickproblems. It is entirely dedicated to what the title implies. In their sidebar, to understand what is technically a big dick, they say, if you've ever run into any issues because of the size of your penis, you qualify. No hate to my big dick brothers, but everything can be a problem if you want it to be. Vushus asked me what my first years on the internet were like. This actually took a lot of focused recollection to go back as far as I could remember, as it's much easier to remember how I used the internet once I was somewhat familiar with it in middle school. One of the very first sites I remember being amazed by was Wikipedia, and that was sometime around 2nd grade. It was similar to some of the encyclopedias they might have had at the bottom of the bookshelf at school, but it was remarkable in that even the strangest thing you could want to know about would have a whole page. Even years on from this, I always loved Wikipedia. It was different from some of the tackily designed and often incomplete web resources that were introduced in some sort of intro to computers class in 4th or 5th grade, where we'd go on web quests, which were essentially pre-made educational scavenger hunts where you'd have to click links from educational website to educational website to complete it. Wikipedia was more streamlined and uniform. You could open up the page on a country and know that you could expect the same details in the same places. The general advantages of an encyclopedia format over just random web articles. And furthermore, a lot of my early exposure with the internet was to do with music. It wasn't until middle school that I had really found sketch and comedy videos on YouTube. But before that, my internet use was always to do with finding new music. I remember being 8 before I had any way to access the internet myself. And I would sit with my dad, and he would help me search for music I was interested in. And this would be 2005 or 2006. I remember asking him to look up videos of Killswitch Engage, Ozzy Osbourne, and Testament. In the following years, when I inherited my grandfather's old computer, I would continue to spend most of my time looking for new bands to listen to, or looking up guitar tabs once I started playing guitar. I even remember my first interactions with strangers on the internet were in chat boxes of music blogs and radio music shows. It's interesting to look back on this. I'm not sure if it's the same for everyone, but even as I considered this just now, I noticed that half of my currently open Firefox tabs are Wikipedia pages, and the other half are related to music. Newt asks, opinions on smoked salmon. So I liked salmon and most seafood a lot as a kid. My first memory of smoked salmon was when 2 of my uncles decided to get it was at a larger family gathering for 4th of July party, in which I must have been no older than 7, I think. It was in the first main house that I can remember. That's how I know. I was probably, couldn't have been older than 7. I tried some of the smoked salmon, and I didn't like it for some reason. I don't know. And every time since then, I've loved it. Though it did take a few years to get over the negative reputation it had in my mind. It seemed like a fluke, really, that my first experience was bad, and I probably panicked or something and didn't really give it the fair chance it deserved, as many children do. Smoked salmon sounds delicious, though, in this moment. Throw it on some bread, some capers. That's it, man, that's all I need. I don't need anything more. That is true pleasure. Moving on, we come to the topic of addictions. Why are addictions so hard to break? So I'm going to steal a concept from Frank Yang here, because it's true. And it puts a frame on addiction that is, I would say, the least likely to get you in trouble by putting too much emphasis on the thing you're addicted to. And so he would say, consciousness, the experience of existing, is inherently addictive. And more or less, anything that can impact that experience is capable of being addictive. What is heroin? Heroin is a substance that changes our perceptions. It changes our conscious experience, and the manner in which it changes our conscious experience is so appealing that our unconscious mind will perform all kinds of gymnastics to give us more of that mind-altering substance. But what makes heroin any different from baseball, or drinking a glass of water, or wearing shoes? All these things are mind-altering substances. Why do people play baseball? The same reason people take heroin. They enjoy the way that baseball changes their reality. We drink water because we enjoy how it changes the taste in our mouth, or how it relieves us from feeling too dry and dehydrated. That feeling of water quenching your thirst after not drinking it for a while is just like the high the heroin user has when he gets his fix. And we wear shoes because we like how reality is when we wear shoes more than we like reality when we don't wear shoes in particular environments. Everything is a conscious changing substance. So what makes heroin different from water is the intensity of its change-iness. So no doubt, if you want to help your friend get excited for a party, cocaine will make more of a difference than picking clothes that match really well. Cocaine only seems more addicting because it is that much of a stronger enhancer of the experience than the nice clothes are. If matching clothes were as exciting as cocaine, they would be equally addictive. I'm sure that anyone listening who's a cynic will think of how I'm not accounting for the concept of physical addictions. And you hear this argument a lot from pro-marijuana people, that it's not physically addictive like harder drugs like heroin or meth. And I think that whole concept is bullshit, even with heroin and meth. The only reason it seems like a physical addiction is because the physical component of taking heroin and meth is so strong and primal. The problem with this argument is that it implies there is something inherently addictive about the substance. Then why can we become physically addicted to acts that require no external substance, like running or solo masturbation? Addiction is simply one thing, and that is the development of reward mechanisms in the brain relating a certain circumstance to the release of various good-feeling chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, oxytocin, etc. If someone smokes a cigarette, which contains an allegedly addictive substance, like nicotine, but they're allergic to cigarette smoke, their brain will not create a reward mechanism for the cigarette. If it's a particularly negative reaction, you will experience the antithetical brother of addiction, trauma, which you can almost think of like a negative addictive relationship, because then you will avoid cigarettes. And this is why, for instance, some people can become extremely addicted to sex. And simultaneously somehow, someone can have such an adverse reaction to sex that they develop a medical condition preventing them from opening up their vaginal cavity anymore. I'm sure you've all seen this variability in your peers and interactions throughout your life. Why do some of those who discover TF2 play for a leisurely 200 hours over the course of a year, and then forget about the game entirely, while others spend multiple hours playing every day for years. You may have begun to consider, appropriately so, that it is even more complicated than what I've described so far. Is it possible for two people to have an identically positive experience with a mind-altering substance or experience, yet one will become more addicted than the other? To which the answer is, of course, yes. A big mistake I think people make in oversimplifying addiction is assuming that some people just have more willpower than others to quit or not indulge. And while there certainly is some variability to our willpower, like there is variability in almost everything from person to person, most of what is happening here when people think it's willpower is just incentive not to. Consider alcohol, and imagine that the experience of being drunk is equally pleasurable for every person, and it releases the same amount of feel-good chemicals for anyone. And now we have two people in our example. We have Osiris and Kyle. Osiris and Kyle have been invited to go out drinking tonight with their friends, and it's a Sunday night. Osiris and Kyle both equally would enjoy getting shit-faced with the bros. However, Osiris has some hesitations about it, because he has a class to attend on Monday, and he wants to wake up at a reasonable hour tomorrow so he can read a bit more of a book about whales and general cetacean intelligence. So he decides he won't go drinking tonight. Kyle has class tomorrow as well, but usually he's fine with skipping some classes, as long as he passes, and he also has no other plans for tomorrow. So, he decides to go drinking tonight. Now consider that this scenario plays out almost every night. Kyle always goes drinking with his friends because he doesn't mind missing class and has nothing else to do, and Osiris almost never goes drinking because he wants to go to the class and usually has other things he wants to have time and energy to do as well. So what's going on here? Obviously, Osiris has stronger incentives not to go drinking. Kyle has nothing to live for. And because he doesn't value his class as much as Osiris does, he's totally fine skipping it. So there's little reason not to drink constantly if you're Kyle. So what does this mean? Don't be a loser like Kyle? Well, the interesting way to think about this is that what makes Osiris different from Kyle is that while Kyle has one addiction, Osiris has three. Osiris passed on the offer because he's hooked on reading about whales and going to class. Now, obviously to a lesser extent than if he were hooked on meth, but still to an extent, he is hooked nonetheless. We typically don't consider things like reading an addiction, no matter how frequently it occurs. But the blueprints for that habit are still the same as the alcohol. Just like alcohol, reading changes our conscious state, and when someone enjoys that state, a connection will form in their mind which encourages them to keep reading, to keep getting those feel-good chemicals. So, if you're addicted to something, you're probably in two categories. The first category is that whatever your addiction of choice is still much more good than bad. Usually, people in this category don't really have much interest in quitting. This is like how some heroin addicts can be perfectly lucid in telling you, I know I'm not done. I'm not gonna quit. I gotta keep going for a little bit, because it's still really great for them. Even if they're living on the streets, they aren't having enough of a bad experience to justify avoiding the amazing pleasure that they get from heroin. You might be interested in quitting, but not seriously, because if it's still more of a positive than it is a negative in your life, there really is no reason to stop. Also consider how it is common for ex-addicts of drugs or alcohol to smoke cigarettes or drink coffee. They just change their addictions, they lower them down. And while to the normal, put-together person without any serious drug or alcohol problems, a cigarette or coffee addiction might be more of a negative influence than a positive for them, to the ex-addict, being hooked on coffee is 100 times better than being hooked on heroin. Even though it's still a vice, it's a much more manageable vice, and better from an overall cost-benefit analysis. The next category, and apologies if this distinction is a little too vague or overlapping, but I think it may be applicable to some of you. The next category is when you're still addicted to something that doesn't get you high the way it used to. And what makes this stage or kind of addiction unique is that if you didn't have all of your past experience, you would not be addicted to that thing, based on what it currently does for you. But because you have all those months or years of myelinated pathways in the brain, expecting reward from the said addiction, you still will go back to it, even if it does nothing for you anymore. And this can lead you to upping the dosage, metaphorically or literally, so that you can still get the hit that you used to be able to, which is dangerous because it's just a path of constantly upping the intake or stakes and upping your tolerance until it gets worse and worse. This is how people get into like poop fetishes and really weird sexual desires because of porn or just actual sexual activity. Things start out pretty vanilla and it's exciting, and then they exhaust that so much that they have to make it even more taboo. And it just snowballs until it gets crazier and crazier. And if you can't figure out how to up the dosage, it just leaves you feeling like shit and feeling stuck. And this is how I imagine most people feel who are really addicted to a video game. Let's say you spent 3,000 hours in the game, really enjoying it being the highlight of your life in that time. But now, you don't get the same pleasure out of it anymore, yet you compulsively play it. Why is that addiction so hard to break? It doesn't make sense, right? How could I be so addicted to something I don't enjoy? It's because you have 3,000 hours of programming saying the opposite. All of those reward systems are entirely the doing of evolutionary biology. Primitive man developed a method to make fire that has worked 30 times so far. But one day, he tries early in the morning when the air is more humid, and for some reason he can't make the fire using the same method. And if his brain accepted that one failure as a reason to de-incentivize that method of fire making, it would be a mistake. So the brain's addiction system is almost totally mathematical. If something gets you high, if it gives you pleasure, if it gives you satisfaction, or is successful most of the time, then your brain will correlate those good feelings with the activity. And so the higher the success rate, the stronger the connection, and vice versa. Now you should hopefully understand the nature of addiction a bit better from the way I see it, why we become addicted. And I hope you start to see that the concept of when something becomes an addiction is really just a line drawn ambiguously somewhere in gray area. There are reward and punishment mechanisms, or associations, for everything that we do. And some are just stronger than others, so we call the strongest positive associations addictions. Withdrawal is no different from having a loved one die, or becoming homeless suddenly. When you are in the full pleasure of an addiction, you have elevated your normal intake of those feel-good chemicals, and likely are minimizing your bad feelings on a regular basis. So when you come back down and return to reality, your baseline hormonal levels now, the difference from where you were to where you've come down to, that's no different from the loss of feel-good chemicals and increase of bad feelings when something truly bad happens in your life, like becoming permanently injured or breaking up with someone you loved a lot. So all that being said, how do you beat it? The problem with most rehabilitation programs for addictions is that they don't spend enough time addressing why they are addicted, but also what they can do to make their life circumstances less likely to lead to addiction. Imagine Kyle from the example earlier. If we send Kyle to rehab or force Kyle to stop drinking for a month, he will obviously not be involved in his addiction. But only for that month. What happens when Kyle leaves rehab or are forcing him to stop? He goes back to his old habits. Not because addiction is a disease, one of the worst misnomers about health ever, but because his life is still shitty. He still has no opposing incentive to do things he also enjoys that require him to be sober and well-rested and not constantly hungover. There are two ways to beat an addiction, mainly. One is you turn a guy like Kyle into Osiris. You give him good reasons not to drink, besides, don't drink because you're addicted. That's a terrible reason. A lot of people actually get sober for their families. Either because the shame of being a negative influence weighs on them enough for it to be a stronger incentive than to keep going, or because their loved ones have threatened to leave them. They put them in an ultimatum. And this may seem petty, but it's an actually effective mechanism. If your loved one will really leave you if you indulged in your addiction, that is much more of an incentive than them agreeing to be with you no matter what. So if this is you, try to think of my drinking analogy with Kyle and Osiris. If all of your energy is on not doing X, it probably won't work. You need to have a complementary emotion as well, of wanting to do X instead. Maybe if you're addicted to TF2, you can work to discover new hobbies that you enjoy, and then you will start to realize, if I play TF2 all night long, I won't be able to hang out with my friends in the quad. Or I won't be able to play piano in a band, which I really enjoy now, my new hobby. I know what it sounds like, replacing my addiction with another addiction? Yes, but everything is an addiction to some degree. You have to remember that. It's just about which addictions you want to run your life. Would you rather have lifting weights be what gets you out of bed, excited to take on the day, or opiates? The other way is you just write it out. This one I think only applies to the kind of people who are still addicted to something that doesn't satisfy them anymore. If you're addicted to TF2 and hate it, just keep playing it until you're so fucking sick of it. See it to the end, that you get every pathetic ounce of dopamine out of it until it feels like such a chore and your brain has reminded you enough times that TF2 is not going to be fun that your addiction will be cured. I hope that's helpful. All right, let's get through some of these simpler comments kind of quickly. Del Conager says, talk about your time playing TF2 with me. Del, I'm a little disappointed, I'll be honest. You could have asked for anything. You could have asked for the single most powerful insight of life that I've acquired up to this point. The secrets to unlocking unlimited energy, the meaning and origin of the entire universe. But you asked me to talk about what it was like to play TF2 with you on the Season 11 Silver Highlander team, Attack on Hue. A subject which I've already discussed in an entire hour-long video I made 4 years ago, much closer to the event of me actually playing on a team with you, seeing as it's now been 5 years since. What can I say? I enjoyed playing on a team with Del, just as I enjoyed everyone else on that team. It was the first TF2 team I played on that actually played a full season, and we scrimmed often and tried our best. And it was really enjoyable to have a team, to have everyone with their own unique personalities and to become more acquainted with each other and strive to improve together over the course of several months. Pretty much the only thing that will get me to play competitive TF2 again will be a team I want to play with, and who's dedicated to spending a season trying together. The best experience I've had playing competitive TF2 was the personal experience aspect of it. Of being on a team of people and getting to know them through the game, through the course of the season, and all the trials and tribulations that come with that. I love the actual game, sure, but for me, the thing that excites me about it is purely the fact that it's something you experience through the shared lens of other people. And people are fascinating. There's just something eternally entertaining about my teammate Wesley has X kind of personality, and he just did something so X personality. Isn't that hilarious? Isn't that great? Alistair, who is a friend I made at I-63, the last TF2 LAN, and have seen a few times since, asks for a critique of the burritos we had the last time we met, and of our other friend's Zip's appearance. The burrito was truly excellent, and I felt as if something primal was being awoken within me as I consumed it. I loved how the burrito just felt so cozy to hold in my hands, with that layer of aluminum foil that you unwrap down the side of it, bit by bit. And I witnessed its heat through my tactile awareness before it entered its complex journey through my digestive system. It just felt so flavorful. I think I asked for pretty much everything they could give me, everything they could put on it. It had 2 types of beans. It had the more flavorful rice variant. It had some sauces, lime juice, cheese, lettuce, other things I can't remember. As I believed I mentioned then, due to the stark contrast with my rigorous diet of sweet potatoes, oatmeal, pasta, and bacon, it truly was an intense sensory experience. And I can almost guarantee I got more pleasure out of it than anyone at the establishment who was also eating. Zip's appearance was satisfactory, though his mustache undoubtedly stole all of our attention. It was successful. What more can I say? Sometimes you just know, you just look at it, and you know, in a fraction of a second, whether someone's new outgrowth of facial hair is right or wrong. I don't know why. And Zip's mustache was just so right. I won't lie, it was so effective I can't even remember what he was wearing. But maybe that would have happened anyway. He was probably wearing a jacket. Excellent fashion choice. The jacket is a staple of cooler climate fashion that will remain relevant for centuries. Antoine asks, what do you think about Dr. Face's change of uploading from Gmod to furry skits? I've never heard of Dr. Face until this comment. I can understand how if he's developed a large audience on a certain kind of content and shifted over to another type, how people may be upset. But at the same time, I can't personally have issue with this. Regardless of what someone wants to make, they're of course permitted to change the direction of their channel as wildly as they want, as they will surely understand the risk involved, However, if anything, it's still probably a bigger gain than a loss, because it's so difficult to gain traction and growth on a new or smaller YouTube channel. So it's the most prosperous route to just continue using the same channel, even if most people hate it, because you're probably still having more people who like it than if you would have had if you just started from scratch. Jack Walms asks, what do I think about Warsaw? And for those who didn't catch it in the video I uploaded asking for questions, my example question was that maybe people wanted to ask me what I thought of Warsaw. So, what do I think of Warsaw? I've never been to Warsaw, but I like it. I just like Poland. I'm pro-Poland, just because I want to be. Phil Bertien wants me to talk about the complex relationships in TF2 between the classes, and why the soldier calling Demoman racial slurs is emblematic of our current Western society and culture. So, TF2 is really a beautiful game because of all the chemistry that can arise from the crazy diversity of scenarios with different arrangements of opposing classes. You get more of a taste of these circumstances in pubs than you will in 6v6, due to the class restrictions and focus on a distinct set of strong TF2 relationships, like the duo of a medic and a pocket soldier, or the art of working with your team's other scout as the scout yourself, finding the correct yin-yang of aggression and passivity that many scout combos do. In pubs, you find all sorts of really strange situations, having to kill a heavy as engineer, and then you have an allied spy all of a sudden you're working with, or spy checking for your engineer as pyro. The list goes on, and it's so extensive, with each interaction being capable of, such comprehensive detail if you really wanted to look at it. So I'll save that for another time. In regards to the soldier calling Demoman racial slurs being emblematic of our current Western culture, I guess it is like that, in the way that there are no voice lines of soldier calling Demoman racial slurs. Just like how Western culture and the coming generation is the least racist it's ever been, and how the overwhelming majority of people don't give a fuck what the color of your skin is, as long as you are a decent and respectful person to them. Racism exists, but so does armed robberies, and murders, and human trafficking. There is injustice in the world. Just be careful not to get caught up in the CNN boogeyman of radicalized poll users ready to kill, lurking at every street corner in middle America. Telephone fan wants me to talk about Mr. Slin again. In the same way that I mentioned earlier how it's easy to love people just for them doing things in their own distinct way, I love Mr. Slin for all of his Mr. Slin-like nuances. And I've actually spoken with Mr. Slin once now. It was in a Discord call, as I think I've kind of come on his radar a bit more since he started watching my videos. We talked a lot about hypothetical situations that were sort of designed to suggest what we were really looking for in life. I don't think I argued my points as effectively as I could have, though this is pretty much always a valid self-criticism. Or there are just certain things we don't totally see eye to eye about that may have been the source of that feeling of slight disconnect. Essentially, I just see a lot of potential in Slin to do grander things in his life than work at Twitch and grind video games when he's not at work. I'm not saying he's gotta be like Elon Musk, but I've always admired the way he approaches thinking about things and learning, generally speaking. And I think he has something greater to offer to the world, which is currently untapped. And while I do tend to feel this way about most people, I don't think that makes it any less true. Slin is the most striking to me in this way out of anyone notorious in the TF2 community. Telephone fan also asks, should I be able to call people trannies without getting silenced? Yes, I think people should be able to say anything. However, it gets messy when we consider that a lot of the silencing nowadays happens by privately ran companies. Moreover, the TeamFortress.tv forums does have the right to silence whoever they want, without reason even, because it is their site. But it's kind of fucked when we think of big sites like YouTube, who are so integral to the flow of information these days, that being silenced from the site is almost comparable to like maiming someone's hands so they couldn't write in the Viking Age. Almost. Essentially, I don't think it's smart to silence. If you're a site like YouTube, it could come back to bite you in the end. I mean, it's happening right now. YouTube censorship is becoming more and more of an issue, and almost everyone opposes it. You know, while it doesn't seem like any problem for YouTube now, if things go too far, you will see other businesses adapt to the holes in the market where certain speech is banned, which will also only hurt any of the political causes behind their censorship. Censoring only gives people more reason to conspiracize and double down on their beliefs. Which brings me to Ranger Unit Number, asking me how many Jews died in the Holocaust. When you post a video asking people to give you discussion topics and you're already a channel that draws a more esoteric audience, you know, it's crossed my mind before that I would receive a question like this. I've been on the internet enough to be familiar with the concept that the casualty number of Jews in the Holocaust receives intense scrutiny from skeptics who say that it has been increased over and over again, or some saying that no Jews died at all. The traditionally accepted number is 6 million. I'm not going to try to bullshit you here and act like I've done my research on this, because I haven't. There's plenty of things I have looked into, and the Holocaust is not one of them. And so I'll talk strategy for both sides here. I don't really think Holocaust denial being hate speech or illegal in some countries is a good idea. I don't think the denial or criticism of anything should be illegal anywhere. But we'll look at this with a fun hypothetical I always like to imagine. If I'm the guardian angel of some governments or Jewish societies who don't like people denying the Holocaust, my best advice for them in being their guardian angel and wanting whatever is best for their goals without my own judgment would be for them to not censor anyone trying to deny the Holocaust. Obviously, censorship only makes people more inclined to believe that something was fabricated by the powers that be, and it also hurts their own cause. If Holocaust denial is so obviously illegitimate and easily refuted by every historian across the world, why would you need to ban it? Obviously, there's people who promote this concept of hate speech being dangerous, and they would respond to me the rebuttal that it incites violence, where I will argue again that the outlawing of hate speech will only further radicalize those you wish to silence. Consider as well that Holocaust denial is not unique. Almost every famous genocide, Rwanda, Armenia, Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge, has a subculture that accuses history's recording of the events of exaggerating details or lying about it happening outright. And I think that's healthy and natural. Understandably, this is a touchy issue because genocides are terrible. And no one who's had loved ones died wants to know that there are people who think they are a part of a hoax. But victors do write history. And I can't tell you anything about these genocides because I haven't looked into them, but I can guarantee you that there are certainly historical events that are created for propagandistic intent, let alone that the details of some historical events are often not cold hard fact. Whenever we talk about thousands of people or more dying, particularly the further we go into the past, the harder it is to truly know how many people were involved. All large figures are calculated estimations after all, and due to the calamity of war, in the face of, entirely destroyed towns, the death count is often an afterthought. And finally, because I played Guardian Angel for governments, I'll play Guardian Angel for Ranger Unit Number, and anyone who doesn't agree with the premise of the Holocaust, or any other traditionally accepted event. If your goal is to get more people to deny the Holocaust happening, Asking how many Jews really died is the wrong way to do it. And so I'm assuming what your goals are, because I don't really know if you intended to change anyone's mind with that statement. But regardless, if that is your goal, even arguing about anything to do directly with the Holocaust is the wrong way to go about it, and won't convince anyone unless they're already on the fence. What you want to do is encourage people to look at history differently. The fundamentally wrong approach everyone takes in trying to convince other people of things is talking too literally about the topic they want to change people's mind about. If you do that, it will bring up emotional connections, which hinder rational thinking, because the conversation has changed into conflict with an opponent. They've deemed you already as the other, whatever boogeyman they have constructed in their mind for why someone like you would have that kind of opinion. On the other hand, if you help them expand their perspective of possibilities, they will consider Holocaust denial, or Rwanda denial, or 9/11 conspiracy, or whatever you want, the next time the topic comes into their mind without you even being there. You'll give them the ability to question it for themselves. This applies to pretty much anything that becomes political. You'll almost never get someone to switch sides on abortion, or guns, or drug legality, or gay marriage, or whatever, if you attack the issue head on. You could even make the most perfect arguments, and get them talking completely sillily, making up rationalizations and justifications that, on paper, should crumble instantly under the weight of your lucid, superior points. But it won't matter. They need to consider it for themselves. And most people don't have the clarity or lack of impulsiveness to do that in a conversation where the Freudian sense of ego is so intimately involved. Where the conversation becomes a war when they realize that you are the enemy trying to convert them. Some people are too rigid and stuck that they'll never be switched on any issue. But some can be. And I would encourage you to all be that way. Don't be decided about anything. If you really think conspiratorially, every truth you believe will rest on a conditional pedestal you are ready to pull out from under it at any moment. As you consider an argument, always consider what arguments could counter that, and save both, so you have weapons on both sides of the fight. If everything is resting on a state of potential, it could be one, it could be the other, and is never 100% decided, you will see how some conditions of reality, if proven otherwise, could change the circumstances of a number of different events you have saved in your mind. Kevin Dampstay says, "Hey, hello. I really enjoy your work, and I know entropy and conspiratorial feel is your thing, and maybe dwell a bit on that, or maybe give like a motivational talk in your own fashion." Well, thank you, Kevin. You are correct in that I enjoy making videos that make you feel like everything you once knew was a lie. Obviously that's extreme, but you kind of got the essence of it with the term conspiratorial. I like for things to be shocking and weird and puzzling. Okay, so obviously you haven't said this implication, which I'm thinking of, that because you wish I'd bring more positive vibes, that must mean that there are negative vibes that I'm currently bringing. I know you haven't stated this explicitly, but I also hope it doesn't seem like I'm bad vibes. There are definitely moments that are negative vibes, like the scary cutscenes with whimpering in the background and violent imagery, which are for effect, you know? I try to highlight a lot of emotions in the videos, so there may be some moments that make you scared or freaked out, and there are other moments that just feel enlightening and beautiful, and others that make you feel sick and anxious, like you're spinning, and others that are just humorous and lighthearted and fun. I guess I just don't completely understand what you would mean or what you would have in mind for videos with more positive vibes. I like to think that there are a decent amount of serious moments in the videos with uplifting messages. Even the silly ones have some real-life truth in them. And this video obviously is just face value talking. And maybe I do too much. Stay away from this, avoid this, and not enough. You know, attract yourself to this. This is good. Maybe that's what you mean. I'm not sure. I don't want to cop out your question too much here, but I'm kind of going to. Because I like to think all of the videos are motivational or inspirational in their own ways. Like, I want people to finish watching how it feels to play Medic and feel re-inspired with how exciting and interesting life can be. A lot of times I take topics that seem mundane and try to make them exciting. Or even like the TF2 in year videos, which is just editing the same shit everyone saw throughout the year, overtop Bainey's perfect, pitch imperfect singing. I like to think that should be inspiring in how you can make anything truly exciting and beautiful if you put energy into it. Even with that video Entropy, I made that with my good friend Braden, and I just wanted us to make something really ambitious and crazy, because I know if I found a video like that, I would feel really amazed and inspired just because someone did make that video, just because people are doing things without real reason or being forced to, making things just because you want to make them. A lot of times what is more inspiring to me than any amazing speech or heart-wrenching story is exciting art, like videos or music or whatever. It shows that you can make something out of nothing, or that you can take something that seems unexciting and make it exciting and beautiful. And I try to live with that philosophy throughout my entire life, because it's just true. Anything can be exciting. Anything can be beautiful if you want it to be. You just have to make them interesting, or decide that they already are. Bassoonist from Hell, an older name in the casual TF2 YouTube space, wanted me to speak about Giggly Guy. Giggly Guy is pretty much the OG TF2 funny man, as far as I'm concerned. A lot of my favorite videos from him, and arguably his primetime golden age as a YouTuber, was after I'd been playing TF2 for just about a year, and had first begun to discover the competitive TF2 community. He was really the only TF2 YouTuber I ever watched and had aspired to be like one day. Part of it was how he was kind of accepted as a funny guy in the competitive TF2 scene, and I thought that was a really good reputation to have. Of course, his most famous videos, like the Soldier Skill Enhancer series, are really clever ideas and worthy of their success. But a lot of my favorite Giggly Guy videos are the more simple ones that may not have taken very much effort, but were just fantastic ideas. There's a really short, minimally edited montage of Mr. Slyn playing EVE Online on stream, where it looks like Mr. Slyn is just falling asleep in different positions, waiting in the same point of the game. Edited to a hardstyle song where, each edit is syncopated with the kick drum. It's really basic and silly, but in execution, it's just the perfect short but sweet video that I can rewatch all these years later and still enjoy. Videos like how to improve your aim were ones I remember watching when they were uploaded as a loyal subscriber, and them being totally inspirational in my first videos. On one hand, you can say it's a shame that Giggly Guy hasn't really been an active part of the community in many years, but most of the players from his era, when he played an invite and competed in LANs, have also moved on since then as well. It's only natural. It's just sort of strange to see people like him still around on the TFTV sidebar streaming some other game for 5 viewers, like a ghost, but not gone completely. I don't know what feeds that desire, but it's always a bit more comfortable for me when those players who've been long gone remain out of sight and out of mind. Like, even if Platinum or Salamancer are playing Fortnite or PUBG 4 hours a day, I'd rather not know and stick to the innocent bliss of only knowing of their TF2 glory and keeping the vague vision of them having disappeared on to better things, because that's what we want, for the people we love to move on to greater challenges and offer all of their greatness to the world beyond TF2. Moving on, I was asked to take an intense look at the TF2 default GUI and HUD. I was among the camp who happily, upon discovering the capabilities of being able to use custom HUDs, graduated from the stock HUD seemingly for eternity. Mainly for practical reasons, it just seemed like there were so many convenient benefits to a custom HUD. You could have all the meters and information most important to you larger and more streamlined, easier to deduce the important information as fast as possible, and it's also a natural extension of having played the game for a certain amount when one becomes interested in custom crosshairs, switching crosshairs with scripts, fiddling with view models and hit sounds, all that kind of stuff. Everyone goes through this at some point if they've played long enough, it seems. It wasn't until after a 17-month break from TF2 when I began to embrace and love the stock HUD. At first, it was purely out of blissful lack of concern. I installed the game and played for the first time in ages, and I was just so happy to run the stock game without loads of unattractive FPS configs, remove particles and ads, that I didn't care about customizing anything, in sake of enjoying TF2, the way it's supposed to feel when you first install. And since, almost 2 years later, I've kept it. There's really nothing too detrimental I find about using the stock HUD. As any HUD in a shooter game should offer, it gives a large, helpful health meter, which helps you visually indicate how healthy or unhealthy you are. Of course, you can rely on the number, but in an A/B test, I'm sure we would find that people always react faster to the fullness of the meter than they do a numerical indication. One is apparent, even in peripheral vision, while the other is less so. Overall, the best part of the stock HUD, I think, is that it really suits the art style of TF2. And now sure, I can find a number of sleek, well-designed custom HUDs that I'd probably prefer to the stock HUD, but none of them are that true core visual essence of TF2. That core identity of TF2, aesthetically speaking, is a little rounded and bulky and cartoony and unsleek. Not silly, but not too serious either, and that's always what made it stand out in a really cool way compared to any other shooter. It's not that it's silly or cartoony, it really is its own style. The colors, every detail, it made an identity of its own out of how clear and precise the vision for it was. You know, TF2 was delayed for years and years and went through a number of visual overhauls before release. And I think the hard work of that effort really shows in the game when you install it and give it a spin, maybe without all the crazy hats that have been added since. But even HUD features that may seem impractical, like having the cloak meter be so minuscule, really shouldn't matter, and were probably made to account for the nature of the actual gameplay. After all of Spy's watches already have a cloak meter. Just look at the watch. Most of the items that use this same meter, like the buff banner or Girade's cooldown recharge, weren't added until later in the game, so it makes sense that they may have designed those meters to be more visually accommodating if they were part of the game's original conception plans. The strongest argument against the stock HUD is the distance of the health and ammo meters from the center of the screen, and while this is mostly valid, I'd argue it just looks better from a design standpoint closer to the edge. I love how generally unobtrusive the stock HUD is, mainly surrounding the very edge of the screen, leaving a large space in the center for you to enjoy the show. Wide Angle asks, what interests you the most in real life? We know nothing about you outside of your videos. Well, I wish I could think of a more fancy, varied answer, but simply put, what interests me the most in real life is music. On one hand, of course, you have the consumption of music, which is pretty much never ending. Since I was getting my dad to look up Testament, like I previously mentioned, I've constantly been enjoying and searching for new music. And thanks to the internet, there's so much great stuff if you're willing to sift through the mediocre. In the past 2 years particularly, practicing guitar has been a staple of life, usually taking at the bare minimum 2 hours a day of my time. While I enjoy making videos and that kind of content, music is definitely my favorite medium. I've spent a considerable amount of energy in the last year and a half trying to play in bands, which has mostly been a struggle. For people who aren't familiar with trying to do that, I explain it like dating, and its difficulty to find a good partner. Except instead of only needing one, you'd probably like 3 or 4. Before trying to do this, I had no idea how difficult it was. Finding multiple people who are all at a similar skill level, with similar musical interests, who have sufficient time to write and practice, sufficient funds to pay for rehearsal rooms or travel expenses, and are equally committed to putting in the hours outside of group practices to get things tight, is astoundingly difficult. Though probably more so than otherwise if you've set high standards for yourself and are interested in making even somewhat esoteric or alternative music. There are sites where people advertise that they're looking for members, and you can advertise on rehearsal studio bulletin boards and at universities. I pretty much force myself to talk to anyone I see in real life carrying a guitar case or cymbals, just to sort of screen them. But you're at the mercy of who you meet. You realize that most bands who have success stories were pretty lucky in that all of the members were just going to the same school, or lived in the same town, or asked some guy they knew locally to play drums or whatever, and it happened to turn out pretty good. Even though a lot of the more successful bands you can read about were drunk and high most of the time in their early years anyway. For every band of people who just played with people they knew, or who happened to be around and turned out really good, there's probably 100 bands who did the same thing and just played with the people they knew or happened to be around and were mediocre at best and never amounted to anything. And currently I'm still involved with a few groups and have met a lot of musicians through the process, but you tend to run into the same problems over and over again. Or even if things go well, by the time you get to playing some shows, someone drops out and you're back to square one. I know this is getting dangerously into the complaining territory, but I've been trying and wanting to get something good to work for a while now, and it is getting tiresome. Like, if there was even one person who was in the ballpark of similar skill, interest, dedication to practice, and time availability as me, I'd be set pretty much. And I think the reason I haven't found that comes down to competing interests in the case of a lot of other people. Almost every single musician I've met or played with is in a romantic relationship. I never would have thought this would be a factor, but I bring this up because I think that's a competing interest for their time and energy, and also an explanation for why they aren't more singularly motivated in music. In my case, I really don't have anything else I care about that much in life. It's always been the priority for me. Things will continue on, and I will always practice guitar and be involved in making music, but if anything will come from it, I don't know. Even if I wash dishes for the rest of my life, music will still be the main interest and focus of my life. Or at least this is how it seems based on the last 10 years. Javert asks, how is life in the UK? There are a lot of things I really have enjoyed about living in England. The weather is really reasonable overall. It's often overcast, which just feeds my soul. I really enjoy it. Though you get quite a different atmosphere in the big cities compared to the countryside and smaller towns. But I've met really lovely people everywhere. The public transit makes it very easy to get around from city to city, and in places like London where you absolutely don't need a car. And this is refreshing to me after growing up in a place where you had to drive a car if you wanted to get anywhere. Everyone here is already sick of it, but there's something therapeutic and communal about public transportation. It's nice that you can just relax and doze off while you get where you have to go. I loved driving, but it's in total contrast in terms of this kind of energy you're being a part of. The push-pull paradigm, so to speak. You're doing the transporting in the car, but on the bus or the train, it just happens. Gives you some nice interim time to think about things, read a book, or listen to some music. Though I will say, in general, what I've learned from living here, my first place away from home, is that I don't think the place really matters. Obviously, we can have small preferences about what place we would like to live, whether we like trees or sand or oceans, or warm or cold or busy or quiet. But in the end, I don't really think any of that matters if you haven't accounted for what you are actually doing in life and the people in your life. If you are doing things that really matter to you and that you're fully engaged in and are interacting with people who you feel very close to and value dearly, it doesn't matter where you live. Again, I don't think it's about where you live. I think it's about how you live and with who. That's what seems to really matter. Wobblemonger says Seinfeld. I'm sure Seinfeld wasn't the first situation comedy, but it's definitely one of the most iconic TV shows of that style. And something I find really interesting about Seinfeld is that Jerry Seinfeld is Jerry Seinfeld in the show. For those who aren't familiar, we kind of go back and forth between short clips of Seinfeld performing as a stand-up comic in New York and typical sitcom moments of Seinfeld living life with his friends, an iconic cast of supporting characters. In this way, Seinfeld is weirdly self-referential that it knows it is a comedy, at least in part. If I had to watch it now, it would be a bit unbearable, as anything with a laughing track just feels slightly ruined throughout to me. Like many things, upon initial exposure we often tolerate the presence of that, but with age or time spent, it becomes frustratingly unnecessary and forced. But there's something really perfectly campy about Seinfeld. When I think of Seinfeld, I can't help but think of the feeling of staying in a hotel. There's something just so perfect and destined about staying in a hotel and bundling up in bed and turning on the television after a long day to watch none other than Seinfeld. Would I watch Seinfeld at home? Probably not, but on vacation at a hotel? There's something about that just goes beyond words in terms of rightness. There's something interesting too about how Seinfeld really is the central force throughout the show. Oddly enough, I don't really find Seinfeld himself very funny. He makes for a good straight man, but most of my favorite moments are coming from Kramer or other supporting members of the show. Yet when watching, I always can't help but feel like I am Seinfeld. There's something about his performance, delivery, and neutral expressions that seems to evoke the essence of the archetypal witness, like this perspective we have in a dream. Even now, I vaguely feel like I just accidentally got sucked into the hazy energy of a late-night hotel room, lit by the flicker of Seinfeld on a large CRT TV. Jeans Boy says, Pokemon, let's go to the polls. I don't know what you mean, but thanks. Diego Duke says, hey, great TF2 video. I love this channel. I also love the 2002 single Dilemma by Nelly. It was a #1 hit in 10 countries, including the United Kingdom, the United States, and Australia, selling over 7.6 million copies worldwide, becoming one of the best-selling singles of all time. Mackie asks, do you like Flower? Sure. Lexon says, please do another TF2 video similar to the Medic one. That was great stuff. Okay, yeah. Wilbur Cobb says, talk. Got you covered, buddy. Nick Mish says, I can't help but feel like fuck these guys. I was here first when I see a ton of people posting on your viz because Slyn watched your video on stream, even though I know that's really stupid. Well, yes, you're right. That is kind of stupid. But you're also right that you were here first. I mean, don't think I'll forget who were the OGs when I reach the blessed 8 million milestone. But at the same time, please don't conjure any spiritual resistance to my channel growing. It's been a long road and I appreciate any help I can get. Ceiling Tapestry asks, do you think you owe the system something? Do you feel a duty to leave it better than you met it? I'm asking you this in reference to the paper Industrial Society and Its Future by the strange figure Theodore Kaczynski. Simply put, yes. I do feel that I owe the system something, because I do feel like I am a product of the system, and I should be thankful about a lot of the positive aspects of the system which I reap the rewards of how I'm standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of humanity's technological and intellectual evolution. And I know this because if I didn't feel like I owed the system anything, I'd probably feel totally guiltless about the idea of doing nothing with my life. I don't want to do nothing with my life, and I'd still feel that way if I didn't owe the system. But the difference is that I feel guilty about the idea of doing nothing with my life because I do feel like the system has allowed me to experience a lot of things that I should repay it for. I sort of feel the same way about having children. I'm young, and having a child is not on the top of my list in life right now, but I have this lurking sense in the background that I will have to have children because it's morally right to pass on the torch of life. If my parents more selfishly decided not to have any children, I would probably not exist. So it only feels right to not do that myself. Even if it's not preferable for me, there is a sense of moral duty. Because I was able to experience this, and that is the consequence of my parents' decision. Isn't it only right to do the same? And so this applies to society as well, I suppose. The counter-argument here is that I never asked to be born, and I never asked to be born into the system. So while I may experience the benefits from it, I never asked to be born into it. Or so it seems. The harder dilemma I see is that it may be impossible entirely to not be part of the system you are born into. Even resistance will help shape the ecosystem you seek to destroy. Just as Ted Kaczynski used his own methods of rebellion and wrote out all the problems he has with modern society and technology, even his retaliation has left an imprint on that society which he sought to destroy, even if just in a subtle way. Not entirely sure the extent of his legacy, but it certainly made an impact to some degree if it wound up that you're asking me about it in this video, all these years after he was a free man. And this is a troubling concern for those who wish to disconnect from the system entirely. Even a disappearance will influence the things it used to be surrounded by. I don't know how far I can go to agree with Ted Kaczynski, because there are certainly a number of results of the Industrial Revolution I'm probably very thankful and glad for. Yet, at the same time, my life past childhood has been plagued with an awareness of how technology and increasing connectedness seems to be diminishing the human experience. And that troubles me because it seems that there is nothing I, as a singular entity, can do to change that. Like Ted, as much as I want to change things, what can I really do as a single voice? It seems that I can only make a ripple, and that I'm too small to change the trajectory of the wave. Even if I do owe the system, how can I really give back to it beyond being a slave, another cog that helps support it by following the rules? In my eyes, leaving it better than I found it means taking a step back in some ways. I'm becoming increasingly concerned that all of this media and technology is really hurting the power of individual people. In the past, people influenced each other collectively and cooperatively. It was an interactive process. But now, more often than not, people are influenced in one direction, by the media they consume. And then they congregate with other people who have also been influenced by their consumed media. Almost as if any real discussion or growth between them is just them acting out as puppets of the content projected onto them through their media absorption. And so even if someone who is avoiding influence from the technological hive mind tries to break the mold, they're largely helpless in that they are probably surrounded by people who are already so ingrained into the habit of this rabid media consumption that any of their attempts are futile. I'm sure this all sounds somewhat vague, but I don't want to elaborate too much on how hours and hours of social media and largely depraved entertainment day after day can corrode the human capacity. Because that can spiral out into a very long discussion. And because I'm getting tired, and it should be at least somewhat obvious why that could be bad. Finally, Ceiling Tapestry asks, why do I think people like my videos, and why do I hope people like them? I think the main reason people watch my videos is that they feel different, and that I offer something that's kind of difficult to find from other content creators. I'd say this particularly because the following I've attracted is almost entirely TF2 players, and most of the videos I make are about or pertaining to TF2, and most of the existing TF2 YouTubers are either making gameplay commentaries or just talking about the game from a level of practical concern. Unlike the engineer, my channel doesn't usually concern practical problems. It tries to answer things related to philosophy and understanding what beauty is in the domain of TF2. While I know a lot of people initially become interested in the videos because they're, so weird or funny just in the fact that someone took the time to edit such a silly concept to completion, and so people stick around because it's too unusual to ignore. But I hope at some point they start to see, if they didn't realize it from the beginning, that there's a lot of universal truth I try to throw in things. I don't want TF2 in 2016 to be a video you won't enjoy if you don't play TF2 anymore. Obviously it helps to know all the references inside of it, but I just want it to make people feel a certain way, to be an experience that doesn't feel like just some TF2 video, but feels the way any good art feels. And hopefully it's always inspiring inside and outside of video games. Like, in making these talking videos, fundamentally, my goal is just to help offer perspectives that people may find interesting. And so I think even with the less straightforward videos, that's what's happening. There were a number of YouTube channels for me that were really paramount in changing the way I looked at life. I'll give two as an example, which were Frank Yang and $1 Million Extreme. At face value, Frank Yang is a fitness channel, just a crazy weightlifter, and $1 Million Extreme was a comedy group like Tim and Eric. While both channels made some videos where they just talk seriously about a subject, a lot of the most profound stuff they made fits what it seems like their channel was about. In the case of Frank Yang, it's probably, some weightlifting montage interspersed with footage of his life. And for $1 Million Extreme, it's their more refined skit montages like Ideas Man. Both of them have tremendous value just in their medium, as video art. Whether of the persuasion of comedy or fitness, but they both have so much content that I think has a depth to it that allows you to think about life in different ways that will be so game-changing I can't even do justice to it in words. And it's not always obvious, but they give you clues. Or give you a glimpse of what life looks like for them, even just briefly. Perspective is so important. The way you look at life is so important because it is life. Reality is literally what you make it or believe it is. Like I was mentioning earlier, sometimes the best way to help people see life in a different way is not to tell them how, but show them what life would look like if they thought in a different way. And that's what all the YouTubers who've impacted me have done, and what I always hope to do with my videos. It's not even like there is a master plan or some grandiose intellectual goal to this project. When I made How It Feels to Play Medic, it's literally just, I've got this crazy idea about how you could think about something as simple as playing a class in a video game, and I want to force people to dive into that reality for a bit. So bam, I make a video. Even if it's not really immediately apparent to anyone following this channel why they are, I just hope they're interested. Even if it's like the feeling that they can't just look away. It's all probably a big string of luck that any of the videos I decided to make were made at all. And admittedly, a lot of the time, I just make them because I think it would be hilarious if I found out that someone made the video that I did. Like, I just get kicks out of thinking about someone discovering it and asking, why would someone make this? And maybe that is because it makes them think. There's hopefully something more than just face value. Hopefully it does make you ask those kind of questions, more than average. Conclusively, I guess people like them because it excites them about things. It excites them because someone did spend the time on a concept that would otherwise be too ridiculous or silly to realize. Thanks for watching.